So a couple of questions for you to think about. Who have you forgiven recently? And does forgiveness come easily for you? Let me say it this way. When is it more difficult to forgive, for you to forgive? And do you believe that we can or you can forgive and forget? And one more, why? Why do we forgive? Now, each year, the lectionary, this worldwide appointed group of scriptures for each Sunday, has us exploring, this year, it has us exploring the Gospel of Matthew, looking at Jesus' good news through the perspective of Matthew, who wrote this gospel for a Jewish audience. Now, the Gospel of Luke is my personal favorite. If at the end of my time here, somebody wants to say, what was Pastor Mary's favorite gospel? It's Luke. That's the answer. I can find myself in Luke's style of writing and the stories that Luke highlights. But this year, through our study of Matthew, I'm finding myself appreciating his guidance on building a loving or a beloved community of faith. And I'm finding myself having more empathy or appreciation for the disciple Peter. Yes, Peter seems to blurt out whatever pops into his head, but then again, I'm finding him to be a thoughtful person, especially from today's gospel. It seems that Peter is really wanting to get this right. He seems serious about what it means to be a follower of Jesus' way. Jesus has just encouraged his disciples to, as we learned last Sunday, to confront the church conflict directly within the framework of kindness. He's been helping them see the value of an open, loving community of faith where members have space to work toward reconciliation and transformation. And Peter now has a follow-up question. He's pondering this idea of working out conflicts. And so he asks Jesus, well, Jesus, given that people are and will be sinning against me, how many times will I need to forgive them? Would 7 times be plenty? And Jesus responds, well, Peter, it's much more complex than that. Try 70 times 7. Jesus always seems to have a humorous bent to his answers. And if you, as I did as a little child, started to multiply what 70 times 7 is, I remember as a kid actually writing it down and going, oh, okay, I'm going to check this out. But then the pastor says it's not about the math. Forgiveness isn't something you can quantify. Stop counting, Peter, because counting is an Avengers game. And then he tells a parable. A man is surprisingly forgiven a huge, impossible debt, but then when he fails to forgive someone who, in comparison, owes him much less, his debt is restored, and he's thrown into jail and tortured. But this story, especially at the end, I would love to cut that end out. It presents a conundrum. Jesus endorses continual mercy, but the king in this story seems to have a 2 strikes and you're out policy. But remember, a parable is meant to be understood poetically. As one author puts it, the poetic heart of this parable is the glaring contraction between the servant's fervent desire to be forgiven and his stinginess in offering forgiveness to others. Keep that in the forefront of your mind. Jesus is pointing out that this forgiveness has a rippling effect, or that there's a mutual correlation between the mercy we give and the mercy we receive. Forgive as our trespasses, or if we forgive those who trespass against us. We forgive as our trespasses are. How am I? I had a long week here. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Don't we say that every Sunday? Thank you, Sharon. It is almost like we create a microclimate, an energy field, if you will, around us. Do you have an atmosphere of stinginess? Then you will experience stinginess. If you have an atmosphere of mercy, then no doubt you will experience mercy. I want to caution you here. I've been thinking about putting this in the sermon or not, and I guess it's coming out. Be careful about using the word karma. Karma is much more complex than we understand as Christians, and so I want you to keep it in this type of context. If an atmosphere of judgment is who you are, then there's a chance that you will experience judgment. The world we make is the world we inhabit. And here at Green Valley United Methodist Church, our vision is to welcome all to feel and share God's grace in an open community of faith. Forgiveness is a key part to feeling and sharing God's grace. But forgiveness is not easy. Forgiveness can be distorted and misused. Like when someone is abused and someone tells them that they must forgive and told to remain in an ongoing abusive situation. I want you to note that Jesus used an example here that the forgiver stands in a position of power and security. Forgiveness should not be confused with acquiescence. Forgiveness is fully consistent with taking steps to bringing an end to vulnerable or harmful systems. Let me say that again. Forgiveness is fully consistent with taking the steps needed to bring about an end to vulnerable and harmful systems. We want an atmosphere of mercy and love, and yet it is so difficult for us to offer forgiveness. Someone once said that we hold on to grudges like a tick on a dog. Now, if you are from the East Coast, you can really get that. I was telling Ash last week that one thing I will not miss is that we would take Bella out for our hikes, and every time we'd have to go through Bella's thick fur looking for deer ticks or any ticks, no matter what kind of medicine she had. So, if we refuse to forgive, we are in danger of holding on to grudges, and our spirits become bitter, and we become resentful. And as mentioned before, this can color our whole way of being in the world. Forgiving, letting go of the hurt someone has caused us, can help release us from resentment. And yet, it is not as easy as we sometimes present it to our children. When your children are younger, you may have done this, or maybe someone did this to you when you were a kid. The youngest child bugs the oldest child, and the parent says to the younger child, "Tell him or her you're sorry." And they gradually say they're sorry. And then the older child is supposed to say, "I forgive you." And they're forced to do that. In his book, Helping People Forgive, David Augsburger writes that forgiving is much more like grieving. He calls it, in fact, forgrieving. And much more like grieving a loss, forgiveness takes time. It doesn't happen at that moment like you force your child to do. And much like grief, we go through stages similar to grieving. When we are hurt by someone, especially someone close to us, we may experience shock, denial. We may withdraw. We may have anger. And much like the stages of grief, these stages are not experienced chronologically. Augsburger says that reflection is necessary in the work of forgiveness. We need to critique our part in the brokenness, and perhaps we need to brood a bit. We may have many low days, and then a sense of letting go seems to break through those days of lament. As Augsburger puts it, anger and grief, rage and resignation need to meet in the Gethsemane of protest and the surrender of lament and then the freedom of release. Many times, forgiveness will take the time. And so often, especially here in the West, or as we say in the United States, we skip over lamenting. But forgiveness will involve lament. So often we have glorified skipping the lamenting part of forgiveness, and that we have really adopted an erroneous thinking about forgiveness. We have come to these quick steps that we think we can go through. Before he died, Bishop Desmond Tutu and his daughter Andrea published a book on forgiveness. They, I would think, would be a great pair to talk to us about that. Their experiences as Black South Africans during the time of apartheid. And Andrea, after marrying a woman, was unable to function as a priest in South Africa. They know deep hurt. They've experienced injustice within the church and in their country, and yet they know that without doing the work of forgiveness, reconciliation will not be realized. But along with their guidance on how to forgive, they warn us that forgiveness does not relieve someone of responsibility for what they have done. Forgiveness does not erase accountability. And forgiveness is not about pretending that nothing happened. Forgiveness is not about letting someone off the hook. And forgiveness is coming to the understanding that every one of us is inherently good and inherently flawed. And that within every hopeless situation and every seemingly hopeless person lies the possibility of transformation. Augsburger, Tutu, and others will tell you that forgiveness is not one and done. I'm not a fan of someone asking another person in a heavy voice who has just gone through something horrific, well, have you forgiven her? Have you forgiven him? I truly believe it's a process, an attitude of living. Years after I experienced a personal betrayal and gone through therapy and spiritual direction, I felt I had moved on. Friends even said that I looked happier than I ever had seen me. And then the need to forgive on a deeper level knocked at my heart's door while publicly praying the Lord's Prayer during worship one Sunday morning. The sanctuary was packed. I wasn't leading worship that day, and I was sitting near the front with my friend Betsy. The pastor had asked us to stand to pray the Lord's Prayer. It was the custom in that church. And the moment that we got to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, the tears just began to flow. And immediately, all the memories of the feelings that I had from that betrayal, my dreams, my potential future, that I had been walked all over, that I had been trespassed, trampled by someone, all flashed through my mind. And once again, in those healing tears, I had the opportunity to stand in the need of grace and to know that the person who had hurt me was also standing in the need of grace. What they did was not right, but I needed to let go. If God forgives us, and we who are created in God's image forgive one another, together we create a realm and an atmosphere of mercy, a taste of what God calls the reign of heaven. This does not mean we abandon accountability, but that we strive to be blessings of forgiveness. Strive to be blessings of forgiveness, holding up both justice and mercy in our communal lives. May it be so. Amen.